Hey, Browns fans, Spencer German, Anthony Meglin with you, obviously coming to you live from Indianapolis at the NFL Combine, day 3 of our NFL Combine coverage here at Browns Digest. Sadly, the last day that I will be out here covering some great things for you guys in relation to the Browns. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep watching this weekend. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the players to maybe keep an eye on, guys that the Browns skill positions in particular that they could be interested in and the days ahead and coming into the draft, obviously. But I want to start, I think, Anthony, with just overall consensus, some three key takeaways that both of us have kind of had from the week that has been in relation to the Browns. We had a chance to talk to Andrew Barry. We had a chance to talk to Kevin Stefanski. So I'll start us off. I think, Anthony, my first big takeaway from the week to this point is just that I go back to one of the lines that Andrew Barry had, where I don't necessarily know that the Browns feel they have to be over aggressive in free agency, which means I do think something like the NFL Combine matters because if there's certain positions that you're hearing them linked to, I think there's going to be certain needs that they try to address via the draft, and it's going to be a lot about retention. He specifically said, they feel pretty good about where the roster's at. I reminded everybody on Tuesday that this roster has all but I think 4 starters from last year under contract for next year. So I don't know that we should be going in expecting wholesale changes and some big splash moves. That just doesn't seem like something that's early on the radar this offseason for Cleveland.
It's funny. No one will believe us, but we didn't talk about what our 3 key takeaways were, and that was going to be my number one too, because the sense of confidence
stole right from underneath you.
Yeah, the sense of confidence that he had when we were talking earlier in the week about the roster, and it's frankly it's true. This is a darn good roster, and it's a roster that if you think back to the Greenbrier last year, this is one where it goes up against some of the top rosters in the NFL, and obviously the injuries and everything happen. But you get some of those guys back, you get everyone back healthy and ready to go for next year. You got to feel really darn good about where this team's at. So totally agree. With what you said there, we'd love to imagine the idea of a guy, like Mike, excuse me, I'm drawing a blank. Mike Evans down in Tampa Bay coming to town. Yeah. Some big names coming, but it's the reality is it's not going to be the case. They got a steady roster, and Andrew Barry will never overspend, and don't expect him to, this offseason.
I'll let you give the number 2 so that we avoid stealing from you again, just in case we had the same one. What was your second big takeaway from the week, Anthony?
Yeah, my second one from the week came from yesterday, and it was when Kevin Stefanski met with the media. Obviously, he covered a ton of different things, but kind of when he was talking about Ken Dorsey, one of the quotes that I came back to today, just in reading some different stuff, was he goes something along the lines of Ken's really good for me. And that was one of the things that when we broke down the Ken Dorsey hire a couple of weeks ago, it almost felt like the polar opposite of what Kevin Stefanski is. Ken Dorsey's got that, kind of that big play. He leans on the big play probably too much, but we've been accustomed to what Kevin Stefanski is, and he sometimes gets into the rhythm of being over conservative at times. So it's like, hey, if Kevin Stefanski's saying that Ken Dorsey matches him in that way, that was one of the takeaways that I had, and it was interesting to hear him talk about it and say it again yesterday.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Obviously, we still don't know who's going to be calling the plays. That's a decision for a later time. Kind of makes sense, though. I mean, I don't expect those guys to sort through all those things until they're really out on the field together during the offseason program and kind of getting their hands dirty on exactly what they want to do, especially with Deshaun Watson, who, as we know, is supposed to start throwing next month. They are going to go visit him out in L.A. next week and just talk to him a little bit and sort of have a formal introduction to Ken Dorsey. So that's obviously good things and good signs about just his recovery and getting him back out on the field. Now, I think my second takeaway is just in relation to the announcement about the Greenbrier going down there once again. And Kevin Stefanski said on Wednesday, you can't guarantee that it's going to have the same effect, or you can't guarantee that it's just going to be a seamless, let's do it again, or it's going to equal wins like we saw this past year. But I think what's interesting about it is clearly that was a resounding, success within the organization last year. Players were talking about it all season and just how close and tight-knit they felt after that experience, just kind of being with their teammates and not having any of the outside distractions for 10 days. And I think that matters. and they're trying to sort of replicate that, whether it equals wins and they're back in the playoffs again next year. That all remains to be seen. Maybe they'll change course if it doesn't next year. But I do think it's interesting that they're kind of trying to reclaim some of that magic from 2023 by starting in the exact same place the 2023 season started.
Yeah, no question. You love it, even if it is just an excuse to go on a work trip for 10 days, and to get out of town and get some fresh air in a different place. Even if that's all it is, I think it's a good thing, right? Like you said, don't know if it's going to equate to wins, but it's a good place to start, especially with what it did for the squad last year.
All right, I'll give you my number three. Hopefully they're different. Fingers crossed. My third one was just that the Browns seem to have talked to a number of defensive tackles here at the combine. Braden Fisk mentioned they had. Mason Smith mentioned they had. I think there was a few others that also were had conversations with Cleveland. And I do think pay attention in the coming days, guys, because wide receivers are going to be going working out tomorrow. I'm imagining the Browns are keeping an eye on those guys. They've drafted a wide receiver pretty frequently under Andrew Berry. They just did it last year with Cedric Tillman. There was, Anthony Schwartz before that. There was David Bell in between. So it tends to be a position that they address that way, and they try to draft and develop. Now, the guys that they've drafted at this point haven't panned out to be massive successes, but I think this team continues to just try to take bites at the apple at that position. So you're going to want to keep an eye, and I know we'll get to some names here coming up, but you're going to want to keep an eye on those workouts and kind of what goes on there, because I've said it before. I don't know that we can bank on the Browns going out and signing and spending big on a top flight free agent at that position. I think their strategies more often tend to be we'll trade for a wide receiver or we'll draft and develop a wide receiver. And I think that's going to be the case again this year.
Yeah, it's an exciting proposition especially for this draft class that's so deep. Like you're going to get somebody good. There's going to be somebody good available at pick number 55, whether it's the guy that, Andrew Berry wants, that'll remain to be seen, but there's going to be a name or two that are on the board that you watch play on Saturdays, and that's going to recognize that you'll recognize. What really stood out to me too, kind of to piggyback on that is, their interview they had with Mason Smith last night. And the reason that stood out to me was because it kind of hinted to me that, yeah, they could go with defensive linemen at 55, but that doesn't seem like a position that Andrew Berry would value at that point. And you look at some of the rankings and some of just the pre-draft stuff. Mason Smith is a guy who's projected to go in between like 120 and 140. So if you think about that, that's rounds 3 and 4 there. So like, hey, if they're going to plan for potentially defensive line later on, maybe that is signaling that, hey, they are going to, try to get another receiver early on and start building some depth with some of their interior positions later on. But all of it is we'll never know. We're not going to know till draft night, but just some things that you kind of pick up on throughout the week.
What was your third takeaway, or did I steal it again?
Did not steal it. I was going to bring up Mason Smith there. Just because defensive line is an area that's going to be a little bit of a question mark here as free agency starts, with Maurice Hurst being a free agent. You got Jordan Elliott going to be a free agent there, so you're going to have to and Shelby Harris as well. But you're going to have to fill that position, whether they do it in the draft. That could be an option. They did it last year. They took Siaka Ika, right? He didn't have any production in this past season because everyone was in front of him, so you're going to expect him to kind of fill a void there. But do they go defensive line in the draft? We'll wait to see. But it was interesting to me that they interviewed with Mason Smith yesterday, a guy that was a good player, had great potential, but didn't really
5-star recruit out of high school.
Had a huge injury that kind of hindered his college career.
Yeah, 5-star recruit out of high school. He has a boatload of potential and untapped potential at that the Browns could certainly tap into, and that seems to be the type of prototypical players that they look at in the draft. So I think that could matter immensely when push comes to shove if he's there. It's interesting you bring up sort of where he's projected, though, because like you said, maybe that's a guy you don't need to go after necessarily in round 2 with the 54th pick. You can maybe wait a little bit. We'll see. But yeah, that's an interesting sort of development on that front as well.
And there too, it's like, hey, maybe they do identify some of those guys that are going to be in the 70, 80 range, that if you do have a guy like maybe Xavier Worthy, who's like, hey, we're only taking him at 55, and if he's gone, we're falling back. Because even Andrew Berry the other day said, the question was, are you going to keep your second round pick? He's traded him a bunch before. If they have a guy that they really want and they'll take him. If not, do they potentially fall back a few slots and pick a guy they're comfortable with and they know will be there later on?
Yeah, you mentioned some of the wide receivers. We'll talk more about that here in just a second. I do want to note we've used the name Braden Smith a lot, or sorry, Braden Fisk a lot. Mason Smith is the guy we were just talking about. I don't know if he's going to be there at 54 anymore because this was the first day of workouts on the field, and we saw Fisk put on an absolute show. He led all defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen, I should say, with his vertical jump, which was 33.5 inches. His broad jump was 9 feet 9 inches, and his 40 time was 4.78. Again, led the category, led the position group, and this now seems like an opportunity for him to sort of skyrocket up boards for people. He's clearly pretty athletic, and that obviously is a valuable trait that teams are going to look at when they're looking at defensive linemen. So I think that's an interesting development with him. Chris Jenkins also ran a sub 540. I know Mason Smith ran a just over 5.04 was his unofficial time. And Tavondre Sweat, who's another guy out of Texas who everyone's infatuated with, 366 pounds he weighed in. Dude is a hoss, and he seems like he's going to be pretty athletic. He ran a 5.27, I believe, was his 40 time. So pretty incredible for a guy who's 366 pounds. And those are, I think, some of the names that you could hear the Browns sort of link to. But I do wonder now if Fisk is maybe out of the question.
Yeah, a guy like Fisk, you can't help but be just pumped for him because this combine, really the downside, there isn't much downside to it. Like if you don't test well, you don't test well. Teams will mark that, but it's not gonna be a huge reason as to why they don't draft you. But if you do show out like he did today, you're just going to fly up the boards, right? And yeah. That's just you're taking advantage of an opportunity. A guy, we talked about it yesterday, played at Western Michigan for 4 seasons, right? Played in the MAC, transferred to the ACC, transferred to Florida State, and then really put on a show his senior year, and put himself in this position. And then again today took advantage of the opportunity, which is fantastic. We wrote about it a little bit throughout the week, just about a couple different guys, a number of them that you named right there, but it was cool to watch. It's cool to get the guys on the field today, and it's just fun because you've been there for 2 days now. It's been all media stuff to this point, but it's great seeing the guys on the field really doing football workouts, competing, and really trying to kind of make their mark, make their first impression on a lot of these NFL teams.
Who are some of the other wide receivers that fans should sort of be paying attention to on Saturday?
Yeah, I mentioned Xavier Worthy. He's, in my opinion, he's going to be my favorite guy in like the second tier of receivers, right? The ones
deep wide receiver class too.
Deep wide receiver class. This guy, Xavier Worthy, played down at Texas. He's a shorter guy, about 6 foot tall. He'll measure at somewhere in the 180s range, but the dude can fly. Like, don't be surprised if he runs his 40 and he's in the 4.3, potentially high 4.2s. I mean, he can really scoot, and he's got great hands. He's like my number one on the wish list. I don't think he'll be available right when we're picking, because I think he'll go before then. But he's a guy, in my opinion, that if he is there at like 45, maybe the Browns do try to put a deal together to move up to try and take him. He's my number one guy there. My number 2 guy is Malachi Corley. He's a fun guy. That's a name you should Google because he played at Western Kentucky. He's a former running back. He went to college to play running back, and you can see it. Every time he catches the football, he's impossible to bring down. He runs angry, runs mean, runs through guys. And yes, his competition was, of Western Kentucky. But one game to take a look at, they played Ohio State last year. In that game, 8 catches, 88 yards, and a touchdown. So against the best competition, he showed up, proved that he can do it on that level. 2 other guys at the wide receiver position, both Washington Huskies, both named Jalen as well. Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, both guys that had incredible production last year in their final years at Washington, but have been proven to go vertically down the field. I think Xavier Worthy is a guy who can go vertical. Both Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan can go vertical, stretch the defense. Corley's going to be more of a in-betweener, a kind of a slot guy, but those are 4 names that I kind of have in that second tier of wide receivers that could potentially be available when the Browns pick is on the board at 55.
All names the Browns have been linked to in various mock drafts out there and all of that to this point. We're certainly going to start diving more into doing some mock drafts now that we're at Combine Week, so you can be sure to check all that out at BrownsDigest.com. Before we get out of here, speaking of offensive skill positions, keep an eye on running backs. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I think that the Browns could maybe make a play for running back. One guy that comes to mind for me, Trey Benson out of Florida State. That could be maybe a move. I think there's some other ones they've been linked to as well. There's the potential that they could explore that route. And we can dive more into why and all these different things later. But obviously, part of that is Nick Chubb's in the last year of his deal, and you don't know if you're getting the normal Nick Chubb. We have to kind of see that happen. So just saying, I don't know anything. I don't have any sourced information here, but I'm just saying keep an eye on the running back position because I do think that that could be an area that the Browns also look at come the NFL draft.
And another name they were linked to, at least this morning, obviously not confirmed. I'm not sure if it was confirmed or not, but Audric Estime from Notre Dame looked
Yeah,
like
that was
from
another
what
one I saw pop up.
that he met with the team yesterday. So a guy who is that like Nick Chubb build, where he's a little bit bigger, not quite the running back that Chubb ever was, but kind of that bigger build type of a guy. So we'll see. You know, value is the biggest thing when Andrew Berry.
I'm just going to say why that matters because I was going to save it, but
yeah,
I think guys like Jerome Ford, he put up fine numbers, but I think a lot of his numbers were padded by several big plays that he made.
Mhm.
And I think that's the thing. Like I think you're realizing that they drafted him in the 5th round. He's a 5th round running back. And I think there's an opportunity here to maybe add to that position, especially as Nick Chubb gets older. Anyway, you got to first start thinking about the future. And this draft could present a good opportunity to do it. So
and in a draft that isn't deep at the running back position, like running backs aren't going to be flying off the board. They aren't in the 1st round anyway. But even late in the 2nd round, you're not going to see one go for a while. So if the Browns do have a guy that they decide that hey, that guy can be a difference maker on the team, what are they going to do? Maybe they do take a back off the board, late in the 3rd, or maybe use that to trade around. We'll see. We'll see.
All right, well, I got to get on the road. I've had my St. Elmo's. It was delicious, but it's time for me to head home back to Cleveland. So, as always, guys, we appreciate you following along throughout the week here at the Combine. It's been a lot of fun providing the coverage for you guys, and there'll be more throughout the weekend. We'll keep writing stories. We'll have some more stuff to certainly talk about in relation to the other position groups, but we appreciate your viewership, your following. Be sure to continue reading everything on the Cleveland Browns over at brownsdigest.com, and, of course, right here on the Browns Digest YouTube page.